My name is Ed Nawotka, and I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Publishing Perspectives, which is an online trade magazine for the international publishing business. Now, we're here to talk about data. And as Javier pointed out, data is the new oil. So why not have somebody who lives in Houston, Texas, come and talk about data, as I do? It's also the reason I won't be taking off this scarf, because when it goes below 35 degrees, I get chilly. Data has become the new byword in the publishing business. Suddenly, data is everywhere. And it's changing the relationships we have with each other. Authors can now track their sales online like a stock analyst might track the market. And they are demanding the same type of information from publishers. Publishers are in turn demanding the same type of data and information from retailers. Now, it's no secret that digital book retailers track and store consumer information, detailing what books are purchased and how they are read. Kindle users, for example, sign an agreement granting the company permission to store information from the device directly, including the last page you've read, plus your bookmarks, plus your highlights, plus your notes, plus your annotations. And it's all on their data cloud services. This is wonderful. A lot of people are concerned about privacy issues. That's an ongoing debate. But the question for you in this room is, now that we have all this data, what is it good for? The most important point I want you to keep in mind throughout this discussion is this. While data can tell you the what of something, it won't necessarily tell you the why of something. Now, this is just the beginning of the application of data to the publishing industry, and we are only now beginning to understand the impact of what it will have on our business. But with patience and practice, we will begin to extrapolate the why. Now, we all know there are basically two types of data: big data and small data. Now, I want you to think of something particular. I want you to think of the human eye and what you can see when you look into the night sky. That is small data. It's what you as an individual have the ability to see on your own without assistance. When you look up into the sky, think of individual stars like individual books. And when you can see those stars line up in the night sky, you can see with your naked eye where it sits on the bestseller list, the copies sold, the foreign rights revenue earned. It's the data you have in your grasp. Calling it small data is in no way to diminish it, because the beauty of small data is that it's clean, it's discernible, it's applicable. So now that you can look at the specifics of reader behavior, for example, it raises several questions. Barnes & Noble is the example I'm going to use. Barnes & Noble, being the largest US book retailer, has actually given us some information from Nook readers, their e-reading device. They've determined, for example, that nonfiction books tend to be read in fits and starts, and long nonfiction books get abandoned earlier. What does this tell you? Well, it raises several questions as publishers. How do you, for example, incentivize people to get people to read an entire book? Is there a way to do that? Should publishers perhaps look at breaking up longer nonfiction books into shorter, cheaper titles? These are questions you can begin raising. Nook readers who read the first book in a popular series tend to immediately download the second. Well, what if they don't? Is there a way to incentivize that? Do you then bundle the rest of the books together as a single price? These are the kind of questions and answers that can be raised by data. Now, if small data is like looking up at the night sky with your naked eye, then what is big data? This is the real big buzzword that we've all been hearing about so often. I would like to propose that it's a bit more like looking through one of those massive telescopes that survey the universe. If looking at the night sky with your naked eye is small data, and looking at it and getting precise information is a bit like looking at a small telescope. Looking through one of these large, massive telescopes will give you not only individual stars, but you'll be able to discern the actual shape of the universe. Now, how does all this space analogy relate to publishing? How is big data affecting your lives? Well, it's changing the very definition of publishing. The real competition publishers face, which has been brought up time and time again, is the user-generated content, whether it's self-publishing, Google, social media sites like Facebook and Twitter. If you begin to think of data as content, you'll see what I mean. Millions of self-published books. Users on Twitter are putting out more than 450 million tweets a day, and that number is growing at 200% a year. Now, that number is probably a little bit low because we don't have the exact current data. Facebook users are uploading more than 10 million photos a day. They click like 3 billion times. That's 3 times for almost every person on the planet. It's easy to dismiss social media as mere ephemera, but to consumers who spend longer and longer chunks of their day online instead of reading, to them, it's content. Now, I want you to consider, to go back to the space analogy, I want you to think of the pre-digital age like the days before the Big Bang. The universe was concentrated into the publishing industry. Digital is like the Big Bang. It spews stars, planets, asteroids, and let's face it, tons and tons of space junk. But once you begin to think of those tweets and Facebook posts as content, then you'll begin to see the true shape of the universe. And as we all know, that universe is expanding, and fast. A professor at the University of Southern California named Martin Hilbert has tried to quantify everything that has been produced, stored, and communicated. This includes everything from printed books to tweets, paintings, music, video games. He estimates that in the year 2000, just 25% of the information was digital. 75% was analog. Today, he estimates that 2% of information is non-digital. The number has gone from, in the year 2007, about 300 exabytes of data. An exabyte is 1 billion gigabytes. Today, that number has quadrupled to 1,200 exabytes of data. It's an extraordinary and astonishing figure when you think about it in your head. Now, the question is, now that we know that this universe of ours is expanding, how do you navigate it? How do you get the stars to line up to create a bestseller? You might think that companies like Google and Amazon and Apple have a complete monopoly on big data. Now, as Javier pointed out, you as publishers have an opportunity. Even in a small market like Italy, you have the opportunity to work with startup companies. For many people, the fear is that companies like Amazon and Apple and Google treat the rest of the world like savages. Now, you have the ability to fight that instinct. There are certain signs. There are companies that, again, are beginning to try to marshal big data and analyze it and use it. In the States, there's a company called Bookish, which has been somewhat of a joke, somewhat derided. They went through many CEOs and millions of dollars of startup money. But there's one interesting stat that has come out of Bookish. They've employed an MIT graduate named Karen Sun, who has been given the title of Recommendations Data Scientist. She claims to have deconstructed 400,000 authors' information, 2 million titles, and they've put, they claim, trillions of calculations into their discovery engine. It's a fairly interesting endeavor. But again, you don't have to have $10 million of startup money or investment money to get into data. And several of the speakers who follow me today are going to show you exactly why. But again, as I said earlier, the most important question to keep in mind throughout this entire discussion is what, not why. Why is the elephant in the room. And in a world inundated with overwhelming amounts of information, virtually all of it free, The question publishers must answer day in and day out is why? Why should I publish this book? Why should you buy this book? Why should you read this book? That is what you do as publishers. Your job, dear publishers, with your creativity, your instincts, and your experience is to answer those questions. And let's be honest, in publishing, the what of data is nothing without the why.